And welcome, everybody. I'm going to hand it off here to Executive Director Bell to kick us off this morning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Natasha. Good morning, everybody. Andrea Bell, she, her pronouns, Executive Director here at Oregon Housing and Community Services. First off, let me just acknowledge, I think we had 200 plus, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 folks register to be here. Not everybody chooses to start their morning off to talk about Article 11 Q bonds. And so I just want to acknowledge and appreciate that we're in good company. I appreciate your presence and participation this morning. My belief is that we are all here, yes, because we are, for all of the right reasons, nerds and want to dive into all of the good things. I also want to just acknowledge that the collective us, that we are individually and collectively here because we care about the people of Oregon. We care about making sure that the tools that we have at our disposal, all of them, including Lyft, are doing what they are supposed to be doing in service to the people that we serve. And so I just want to acknowledge all of the folks that are here locally across the state, all of the folks that offer and engage in offering us counsel on this. I'm just appreciative of everybody's work that you all do day in and day out, some of the things that we see and so many of the things that we don't see as well here today. So I won't pontificate on for too long. I want to just acknowledge a couple things, and then quite frankly, I want to just dive right into the conversation so that we can get into it. I know over the past few months, maybe a little bit more, I know many of you have been engaged in so many conversations pertaining to Article 11 Q bonds, our Lyft rental, Lyft home ownership programs. As I look across, I see a lot of familiar faces that we've had one-on-one conversations with, small group conversations with. But I think most of us agree here at OHCS that now is the time for us to collectively engage in, I think, a much more expansive conversation so that we can, one, be in right relationship with all of you about what we're seeing from a state perspective. And we also acknowledge in that our viewpoint, our own expertise is not the only one that exists. And so we want to make sure that we are having some open and generative conversation about what we're seeing with a really particular shared interest in wanting to know what you're seeing and what you're experiencing in your respective space. The state has substantially increased its investments in Article 11 Q bonds. We came out of session with over a billion with a B, dollars in housing resources. And I think all of us want to see to it that we see $1 billion worth of progress in the lives of the people that we serve day in and day out. And so that is the prism that we're showing up. That's the prism that we want to seek and engage with you here today. Now, candidly, particularly as it relates to Lyft home ownership, we know that there have been newer growing pains and newer challenges that we've been working through and discussing through with many of you. And it has been great to see the expansion of that work. And we also know that that program has continued to be pressure tested in new ways. We know we've got a lot of new partners that are engaged in it. We've got a greater use of private lenders to support affordable home ownership development, all of which are great things. And we want to make sure that we are making the time, prioritizing the time with all of you to have more expansive conversations around the challenges and solutions, not only from a state perspective, but from each of your perspective as well. I think from my seat, we also have a particular interest in knowing where we may need to have and engage in some more holistic strategies, collectively with the goal of making sure that the tools that we have are durably resilient. From my suit, we want to institutionalize what we've done well and what is working well, and then we want to focus on what remains to be done. I know you all are not a group of shy folks, so the things that remain to be done, tell us that, give us that. Generalities are great. Specificity, candidly, is so much better. And so as you all are listening to us today, we invite, we expect, we welcome, we want you to be empowered to give us feedback about what you're seeing. Again, the more specificity, the greater the detail, the better, so that we can help diagnose and understand solutions. We want to do that with a shared focus and, of course, a discipline about how we can optimize the tools we have centered on humanity and the people that we serve. I mentioned at the top that we had 200 plus folks registered for this conversation today. I want to acknowledge that we have a lot of partners here, one of those being our counsel from the Department of Justice, amongst a few of expert counsel here today. We are all, the collective we are all showing up here today from a space of wanting to listen and be responsive to feedback with an end goal and with a collective and consistent and steadfast goal of getting to a place of solutions and figuring out what barriers are and where we can work together to remove them. To offer just a peek behind the curtain a little bit into the agency, we seek to day in and day out, some days we get it right, some days we don't get it right, but we try to see feedback as a gift. And so I want to continue to lay that out in front of all of you so that you know our intention, which is that we are hoping that we have created a table amongst more tables to come where you feel supported and empowered to give us as your state agency feedback in that, and also know that collectively through the lens of humanity, we will continue to be relentless in pursuit of progress, relentless in pursuit of getting to a place of shared solutions, so that whether you are serving in, residing in one of Oregon's small towns or rural communities or one of our bustling communities, we want to make sure that we have a tool that is workable, and that is really workable not only by the executive director's definition and leadership here in the agency, we want it to be workable in each of your respective communities as well. So with that, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your presence. I'm going to yield and turn it over to our Deputy Director to get us into the conversation today. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And again, just echo that sentiment, gratitude for being here, gratitude for engaging in the conversation, desire to understand and truly be collaborative in the conversation. My name is Caleb Yan. I'm the Deputy Director. I use he, his, him pronouns. And I just want to share just a little bit about kind of how we intend to spend our time today, and a little bit more specificity around kind of the posture and some of the things that we're looking for. As Andrea touched on, LIFT Article 11Q bonds touch multiple divisions, multiple programmatic divisions across our agency, rental housing, which is inclusive of LIFT and also permanent supportive housing, as well as home ownership, which is one of the areas that has really come to scale recently over the last year or so, and provided an opportunity for new faces to be in the conversation. And we want to be able to spend time really level setting. So what you see on the agenda here is to kind of have a bit of a shared approach, from starting with rental housing, but also then going into home ownership to discuss, how we make this tool, which Article 11Q is a complicated financing tool, how we make that balance the needs of the state, of the owners of the homes that are built, and of the lenders. So we want to kind of level set on some of those things, discuss updates on both the program, so what has been happening, but importantly, the status of the documents that we're using, the resource utilization, what has been used and what will become available. And then specific to homeownership, spend a little time discussing some of the things that have recently come up through feedback that we have received, particularly from, but not exclusive to Housing Oregon. Again, the intent here, and maybe we can move to the next slide, is to really do some of the level setting as a tee up for future conversations. So that kind of, this slide goes through again what those goals are, to be really, really clear. we want to say from our vantage point, as Andrea said, our vantage point is just that. It is the vantage point that we have. But from our vantage point, we want to make sure there's a common understanding of what the tool is, of where we're at, and we want to be able to do that as we look forward to even greater Article 11Q investments in the future. And so part of that is to truly understand what challenges may exist, what are the areas that we can lean in, get feedback on, to have future conversations, to make this tool work as good as it possibly can in all communities across the state. And I think part of that, there's a level of specificity and a tee up for future conversations, specifically in the homeownership realm of Article 11Q bonds. Next slide. We're going to go through, I'm going to hand it over to our two program division leaders here, affordable rental housing and home ownership, in a minute. There are multiple ways to give feedback. You can go into the chat. Please, you know, as Andrea had said, the more specificity, it makes it that much easier for us to, whether we can't answer that question in here, which we will endeavor to do where we can. Inevitably, there will be some questions that we don't have the answer to, and we need to go back and consult from a program policy, consult with our Department of Justice colleagues, etc. But putting those questions into the chat allows us to have that specificity, and we want to be clear in our commitment to getting responses, whether we're able to provide those responses today in the conversation or in follow-up, either written communications or follow-up conversations. So with that, I will hand it over to Natasha to dive into the meat of the content.
Great, thank you, Caleb. Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Detweiler-Davy, she, her pronouns, Director of Affordable Rental Housing here at OHCS. Happy to be with you all here today. So I think the first thing I wanted to, kick off with is just a regrouping around Article 11Q bonds, what that is, and how we are approaching its use for housing investments. Article 11Q bonds are generated from Article 11Q of the Oregon Constitution. And so those resources are very specific about how the needs for the use of that resource and those investments, and specifically some critical aspects. Article 11Q establishes that the state needs to have either ownership or operational controls. I think there's a lot of discussion around this ongoing. We are using an operational control strategy to meet the constitutional requirements for these resources in our LIFT program. And I also, affordable rental housing also uses Article 11Q to fund our PSH development resources. So we are using an operational control. The Constitution also dictates that and establishes that this investment needs to be a permanent asset that furthers a public purpose. And then the funds need to be used to benefit the public, not for private entities and private profit. So those are the kind of the basic tenets that we take carrying into this. And so specifically for when we are deploying these resources in a housing investment, in applying these resources to housing, we have identified a need to not have our affordability be foreclosed, so that public purpose continues, that we put our resources out in first position so that we have sufficient operational controls, and then those operational controls need to be meaningful. So they can't just be cursory or theoretical. And that then kind of thinking about that process and what that looks like in the homeownership versus the affordable housing space. I think, have long been in these conversations on the rental housing side. And so I think there's some practice and comfort, and there is a distinction when we're thinking about developing homeownership opportunities. In a rental housing structure, We are putting the resource in again as a loan, and that loan goes to the LLC, the partnership that will own and operate that project. We are securing our resource against the property, inclusive of the building that is built upon it. And then we are able to share first position with the other lender, and it usually starts out as the construction lender, and then it converts over into the permanent loan, either with the same lender for both or for different lenders for the two different types of financing, construction versus ongoing permanent debt. And so in this, we are, establish it that the owner, the LLC that is responsible for paying that third-party debt. The lift loan is quiet. It sits there. There's not regular repayment going on. It is structured most often as 30-year term that you can then satisfy with extended affordability. And so in that effort, we are financing and securing our resources against the entire property, inclusive of the building, and having those operational controls with and the ability to not have our affordability be foreclosed in the case in a situation where the other permanent lender is facing default. So in those circumstances, think of that owner as paying that regular monthly payment on that other debt, the permanent debt on the project. In an affordable home ownership structure, we are providing a loan to the nonprofit, and that is a critical distinction, given that in the structure of the land trust, the nonprofit needs to be the eligible covenant holder. So we are issuing a loan to the nonprofit. We secure the lift resources against the land, and then the home buyer needs to be able to access a private mortgage or mortgage for the actual purchase of the home. And in this case, since we are not having regular payments on the land on that lift loan, it's that long-term, that permanent structure is for the home buyer to be paying their regular mortgage payments. This is kind of a picture of what that would look like. So on the left, then you can see on the rental housing side, we're securing all of both the lift subsidy along with either the construction and then permanent debt against the entirety, versus in the home ownership model where what we are able to secure with the lift lien is the land, and then the homeowner needs to be accessing a mortgage for the property. Obviously, the elephant standing next to that house is, how does the construction get financed? And how does that operate in that structure? But the kind of conceptual basis that if the land is worth $200,000 and we are investing $200,000 in that land, in that property, then there's not additional value to be leveraging into the project. So looking now to lift rental specifically, and then I'll hand it off afterwards to Keeble to dig in on home ownership. This is, I believe it was beginning in around spring break in 2023 in March. We recognized, given all of the different conversations we've had, the increased resources, the need to be thinking about this structurally and systemically, entered into these conversations around, what is it that we need as the state? How do we make sure that we have clear and consistent strategies across all projects and all investments? How can we make sure that we are achieving sufficient controls needed to meet the operating tests of Article 11Q bonds? And so I think, and as we had gone through all of that, all of those conversations really identified the three core tenets of what the state needs. I talked about those already: affordability to not be foreclosed, meaningful operating controls, and loan in first position. As we engaged with lenders on these projects who were looking to either invest their construction resources or long-term permanent debt, the three critical factors that they were highlighting for us is that they also needed their loan to be in first position. when there is a foreclosure action, they needed all liens in that to be extinguished, and that was inclusive of the lift lien, and they needed to be able to be repaid before the state. And so having those three factors from both sides let us and our strategic colleagues in Department of Justice and with bond counsel allowed us to really dig in on each of those three components in balance with each other. And so really negotiated and landed us into a place where we do have lender and state in shared first position. When there is a foreclosure, the lift lien is able to be extinguished, and that there are really sufficient controls and noticing requirements around it that let the bank do what they need to do, but also gives the state a place and a role in the process. And so, and again, landing really critically, and this was very important for lenders, is that when there is enforcement action that is a foreclosure, both the bank trustee and the state trustee are terminated. Then we move over to affordability requirements. The lenders were comfortable with affordability requirements surviving in the case of financial foreclosure. And so that was really established and documented into the operating agreement, which remains in place. And that that there are pathways to eliminating that operating agreement, but both the state and the lender, if they're still in the deal at that point in time, would need to be in agreement, and gives the state an opportunity to purchase when there is a financial foreclosure. Lastly, then on operating controls, this was operating controls that are meaningful. We're able to add in ability to enforce monetary penalties, gives the state's right to consent or sale or transfer of property, and establish an extension of the affordability in the case of that financial foreclosure. And that is thinking about, in the case of a financial foreclosure, we're in shared first position with another lender. We allow the liens to be extinguished. We allow that other lender to be paid off first. And what we get is our continued operating controls and our continued affordability. And so if that other lien if all the liens are extinguished and that foreclosure persists, what OHCS or what the state then is able to get in that case is the satisfaction terms, right? So we would extend the affordability to achieve what we would have had we otherwise been repaid. And I think I want to caveat all of that financial foreclosure in our affordable rental housing projects is incredibly rare. And I don't think it's actually something that we see happen, but this is all preparing for that circumstance and making sure that while the other lender is made whole, the state is also continuing to benefit from its public investment. And so those were, that was quite an extensive effort, again, launched in kind of end of March into April. And after a couple months of work, we're able to get to the place where we began to close deals again. Between April and November, we have closed 9 project financings with Article 11 Q bonds in them, and that is inclusive of 4% transactions, non-4% transactions, transactions with local lenders, with national lenders, and a really broad mix of structures that has really proven that this can work and that there is a way through. And I think, as I'm kind of flagging on here, looking into December, we do have 2 deals that are slated to had our calendar to want to close. One of those has a funding gap. Funding gaps are persistent challenges. The market shift is a persistent challenge. Interest rates are higher. Construction interest rates are variable and volatile, and there's lots of ongoing persistent challenges to our pipeline of projects with funding reservations. But at this point in time, we are not seeing that the status of the Article 11 Q bond documents is what is pulling projects from moving forward, but instead these funding gaps that projects are struggling to work through. as they are getting close to that funding table. And I think I want to pause and say, I see Mike on the screen here from ORIC, who has been a fundamental partner to us and really a linchpin in the world of private activity bonds and conduit issuance and 4% tax credit investment. So I thought maybe I'd ask for a little insight for what you're seeing from the ORIC seat, Mike.
Great, thanks, Natasha. And I'll also just ask if I miss or misstate anything, ask my friends at DOJ, Kristen or others to kick me under the virtual table on this. But Natasha, that's a great summary and really concise. And I think hit all the key points there. I just, in terms of getting in the weeds a little bit, just note that this was very much a collaborative drafting effort with inputs from all participants, various counsel, and others, and in collaboration between us as bond counsel and certainly the entire team at DOJ, I think did a terrific job in terms of ultimately, as Director Bell said, moving from the general to the specific. There are now very, very standardized form template documents for the LIFT program that are being implemented, to Natasha's point, not only in bond 4% deals, but also in transactions with other sources of funding in the LIFT program. So complete consistency, which was our goal ultimately in terms of documentation with respect to the intercreditor agreement, priority and subordination agreement, and operating agreement. There are forms of those documents posted on the OHCS site. So any lender looking to do a project that includes LIFT funding can go to that site and see all the details implementing those key points that Natasha pointed out earlier on this. I think on our call, we had a call, I think yesterday, with our friends at DOJ. I think we counted at least 6 banks, as Natasha pointed out, both regional, local, and national lenders that have now done LIFT projects under what we call LIFT, affectionately LIFT 2.0 on that. I think one of the lessons learned on this, which I assume is going to translate over into the home ownership front as well, is this requires some compromise on this, and really focusing on what is essential to the various funding parties here, and both the legal, policy, and other constraints, as well as the regulatory, credit, and underwriting constraints that our bank partners have in this. And so again, I think as we worked through the issues on the rental side of things, understanding the regulatory, credit, underwriting, and all of those issues was really key to getting to a conclusion on that, and understanding that the banks may not get everything they want. Same with the public funders here. We perhaps did not get everything we wanted, and so compromise was really key. But again, we think it's fixed, if you would, not that it was ever broken, but I think 2.0, we're positively optimistic that we've resolved all of those material issues, given the participation by a number of financial institutions on this, and are in a good place. And we're excited to move forward through year end and into next year to close these transactions efficiently and effectively. And to quote one of my friends at DOJ, we hope that we are, quote, back to boring with respect to documentation on our LIFT funding on the rental housing side. So Natasha, we're cautiously optimistic and really thrilled that we've worked through this reset and have really good documentation in place that I think balances issues, all while complying with those key constitutional requirements for the LIFT program.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. I think the perspective and, again, the teamwork that got us here, both from the state, ORIC, and the partners and the lenders on these transactions, has been a really fruitful process, and really just appreciate it. Everybody is stepping in and stepping to the table to figure out the pathway here of compromise and balanced controls. And so that really is the kind of where we are on the LIFT rental side. We are imminent in sharing the updated templates for that, again, having demonstrated proof of concept, aligning those structures for all types of our LIFT rental use or Article 11Q bond use. Again, both where there are other investors involved, as well as when there are not, when they do or do not include tax credits in them. And so we'll be sharing that. As Director Bell was referencing earlier, there was significant investment of Article 11Q bond into our biennial resources, and affordable rental housing anticipates offering more than $400 million in Article 11Q bonds in the new year. And we're getting close on that funding calendar to be able to share that hopefully next month in draft form, but I think will be a significant opportunity to continue to build housing and using this resource and state investment in housing. And I do see that there are a few questions coming in or comments coming in through the meeting chat. That's great. Also want to remind folks that there is a question and answer section in the Zoom land where you can, if you have questions that want to get answered, please feel also free to use that. We'll do our best to answer what is imminently available to be able to say on the spot, but also we'll absolutely be following up and reaching back out to all of you who have registered for this meeting, as well as through our advisory on our follow-up on the questions that are raised today. And so I think with that, I'm going to transition over to Keeble to be able to speak on the Lyft homeownership side.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Detweiler Darby, for your presentation. You did a really great job of setting the context for the requirements of Article 11 Q bonds and highlighting areas where Lyft for rental and Lyft for homeownerships are different. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the requirements for Lyft within under homeownership and discuss some of our recent program shifts, as well as address concern raised by our partners and also Housing Oregon, and show you all where we're headed in the future. And I'll also want to remind you all that while I'll stop for questions at the end of my presentation, you can either enter a question in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll also post a link for a server that you can use to submit questions. Before I start, I would like to share that to Ms. De La Rosa, we really appreciate your comment, and we want to review the documents with your comments in mind. We would be happy to discuss this further in our ongoing conversation once we've had a chance to perform this review and speak with our DOJ partners. So it is a great comment, and we look forward to talking to you about that in the future. I'd like to move on to slide number 17. Okay, so as Director Detweiler Darby discussed, there are key components of Lyft documents that are structured to align with state constitutional and statutory requirements for Article 11 Q bonds. There's 4 documents that we have in mind when we think about the borrower signing the loan agreement, loan note, operating agreement, and deed of trust. These agreements all work together to ensure that Lyft requirements are met. For a Lyft homeownership project to work, these agreements ensure that affordability is not to be foreclosed. We do this by having the operating agreement in first position before any monetary liens. This allows affordability and operational controls to remain in place in the event of a foreclosure. We need operational control that are meaningful, as stated before. These controls are spelled out in the operating agreement, which reference other agreements signed by the borrower. The Lyft loan must be secured. It must be secured by the land, and it must be in the first monetary lien position on the land. This is primarily addressed by the deed of trust. If there are lenders on the project, there may be an intercreditor agreement and/or priority and subordination agreement that address these needs as well. Next slide. While Lyft has only been around for 5 years, it is currently in a state of growth and evolution. There's also a great emphasis placed on this source due to our current governor and has placed so importance on housing for all Oregonian. On the external front, we're working more with partners. We're seeing more partners come to the table with homeownership development programs and projects. These partners vary in size and come to us with different level of experience in home ownership development. We're invested in making sure that our programs support diverse developers. We're also seeing larger home ownership projects. We fund programs and projects ranging from 2 homes to 82 homes and are seeing an increase in size as well as cost of proposed projects. It's exciting to see homeownership projects scale around the state. We understand that the cost of land, material, labor, and finance are increasing and making it more difficult for our developing partners to get projects off the ground. Our partners are having to find more diverse and creative streams of funding to cover the rising cost of development, and we know this is challenging. Internally, OHCS is undergoing changes to LIFT homeownership. In January, homeownership will increase the largest fund of LIFT we've ever had in one NOFA. We're currently going to advertise $40 million in our NOFA that starts in January. If the demand is high, we also have the ability to add an additional $20 million to that NOFA as well, which could bring the NOFA for next year to a total of almost $60 million. The NOFA will be rolling, meaning it will remain open from January to September, which we hope will make it more accessible to all applicants. And carrying over from last year, we've maintained the increase of $200,000 per unit cap, meaning that that applicants can qualify for the lesser of the appraised value of the land, or $200,000 per unit. Additionally, we have a pathway for LIFT home buyers to qualify for Fannie Mae loans, and we've made some changes related to appraisal requirements and lien positioning. I'll talk about these changes more in the next few slides. Next slide, please. As we talk about appraisal value, in home ownership, the value of the LIFT loan is limited. Sorry, the phone. The value of the loan, the value, hold on, sorry. Am I still there? Okay, I'm sorry, my computer just went black for a second. The appraisal value. In homeownership, the value of the LIFT loan is limited to the lesser of the appraised value of the land plus infrastructure, which is site work, excluding home structure, or $200,000 cap per home. We're working to standardize the evaluation of the land value to ensure that the LIFT loan is sufficiently secured. These changes won't be implemented for projects with a current reservation of fund. For the 15 projects in our pipeline that haven't yet closed, OHCS won't require changes to submit appraisal as long as LIFT is the only restriction placed on the property. Moving forward, we will require the following. An appraisal must be submitted at application. An appraisal must name OHCS as the intended user with the ability to discuss the report with its preparer. Appraisal must be based on the restriction in place on the land that impact value, if any, including LIFT. Next slide, please. Alignment with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Due to the affordability restriction that survived foreclosure, LIFT home buyers are limited to Oregon bond residential loan and portfolio loans. We realize that this creates issues for home buyers and are invested in expanding access to safe, affordable mortgage products. Over the past year, we've been working with Fannie Mae to create a lending pathway for LIFT home buyers during the process. We've learned that non-CLT LIFT home buyers can qualify for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans already. Fannie Mae has created a single loan waiver specifically for LIFT CLT home buyers. OHCS is working with DOJ to ensure our LIFT documents incorporate anything needed for home buyers to take advantage of this waiver. And we will be discussing more at our quarterly home ownership partnership meeting next Friday, December 7, 2023, and sharing guidance about the single loan waiver during the meeting and after the meeting. Slide number 21, please. It's important to start off here by restating that affordability of a LIFT project cannot be foreclosed. Thus, if any individual home went into foreclosure, the home still has an affordability covenant and cannot be sold on the open market. So the foreclosure on an individual market does not endanger the LIFT loan as long as the nonprofit can continue abiding by LIFT terms that run with the land for that home, including finding an eligible placement home buyer. There are additional layers here. The Oregon residential bond encumbers the land and the home, which can seemingly complicate things for LIFT. If the Oregon residential bond loan goes into foreclosure, the nonprofit has the first right of refusal to buy the home. Buying back the home and selling it to an eligible home buyer would keep the nonprofit in compliance with the LIFT loan. LIFT rules have been updated to allow for partial release of the property in the event of an individual home foreclosure, where an eligible home buyer cannot be found to keep the property in compliance with established affordability restriction. The loan agreement states that in exercising its rights and remedies, lenders may cause all or any of the property to be sold as a whole or parcel, and certain portion of the property can be sold without selling other portion. However, our sense is that partners have additional concern about whether the LIFT documents are sufficiently clear about the state's right of action in the event of a default or foreclosure. If our sense is correct, that is a concern. We would appreciate feedback from our partners who have this concern and ask that you provide additional information to us in the survey so that we can more fully understand the situation our partners are worried about, what they face. Slide 22, please. To meet the legal and policy requirements for program, OHCS needs to ensure that LIFT loan is fully secured by being in first monetary lien position, respect to the land. For LIFT home ownership, unlike LIFT rental, we can only secure our LIFT investment against the value of the land because the improvement, meaning the actual home, must be entirely owned by the homeowner. LIFT loans cannot be over-collateralized by other debt. If developers are taking the full amount that the land appraised for in LIFT funds, this leaves no room for a lender to have a first position lien or a shared first position lien on the land. Construction lenders can take first lien on the improvements. For projects with reservations of funds that haven't yet closed, OHCS will share a first monetary lien position in the land with a bank. However, the bank must understand that their remedies in event of a default are limited by the statutory requirements governing community land trusts or condominium structures, and that the state does not have the ability to contract around these requirements. Going forward, OHCS will only be able to share a first monetary lien position if the amount of the state and the lender's combined lien does not exceed the value of the land without improvements. Slide 23. With all these exciting changes, we're working hard to ensure we keep closing deals and improving LIFT over the next few months. Our key priorities are ensuring that the projects in our pipeline can close in a smooth and timely manner. With 15 deals in our pipeline, we're on track to close 4 projects in November, another 5 in December, and the rest in the first quarter of 2024. We're working to develop publicly posted program materials that provide guidance on LIFT requirements and processes for partners. We've been working with other partners our partners at DOJ to standardize templates. We posted the loan agreement, loan note, operating agreement, and trust deed to the LIFT home ownership website, and we can discuss those more at our follow-up meeting in December. Last, we're working to create a clear and transparent NOFA to be released in the beginning of the new year. So together we can continue increasing the supply of affordable homes in the state. Our next steps, we will post the links in the chat, and we'll be posting slides to our website after the presentation. But here are some next steps for those on the calls that we want to continue engaging on LIFT homeownership. You can keep adding questions to the Q&A box. We're about to move on to the question portion of this presentation. If you don't get all your questions out during the meeting, you can submit additional questions, feedback for LIFT homeownership through the survey, which remain open until 5 p.m. December 7th. You can review LIFT homeownership draft templates on our website, and we will be providing additional information at our meeting on December 13th. Thank you all, and now we're open to answer any questions. Thank you.
Right, and so I think we've been going through some of the questions that have been put into the chat or the question and answer function. Of course, please, either will work. The Q&A function is easier to track for sure. So I guess curious if there's any on the team that have questions they want to highlight for discussion. Okay, so I do see, I think it seems like there is an outstanding question on the use in terms of being able to use the LIFT homeownership for manufactured structures or modular units. And so I think that we should probably follow up with a thorough answer on that. I do think that we have had strategies that have allowed that in the past, so we'll absolutely take that to follow up. And I think there's also a couple detailed questions on what happens in a succession plan around homes that are owned in an affordable housing structure. And so I think those likely should be thoughtfully responded to. And then Kevin, I also see just want to acknowledge your comment on process. I think on the LIFT rental side, we have convened lenders, lawyers, teams, both together in teams on deal specific issues as well as an aggregate. And again, feel like as we have reviewed, have been able to continue to successfully close transactions. And so I think as we are understanding and getting more into the specifics of what the ongoing concerns might be, would be glad to take those on. And then I also think, that as the homeownership team is stepping further into that engagement, that those will be more opportunities to do this. Any other, there's been a lot of detailed questions around the homeownership that I don't know, Caleb or Keeble, if you have thoughts on if there's any issues that we want to be able to, that would feel appropriate to right now engage in.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. And I want to uplift. I think that certainly looking at the comment from Mr. Rosa, I think the second to last comment that is currently in the chat related to the limiting the combination of the debt on a project, construction, if there is a construction lender and the LIFT loan to the value has a significant impact on the project. And I just want to say that I think that the conversations around, the appraised value around how we look at that. I know there was a similar comment in the Q&A around, how that appraisal, I think those are really critical questions, as those who are involved in the homeownership development side of this conversation know. The 21-23 budget cycle had an unprecedented amount of general fund, which allowed some of those gaps that occurred, which where the subsidy to make the project work wasn't able to be filled all the way with LIFT because of impacts of the valuation from the appraised value. And so that general fund in many ways was kind of the secret sauce to make those deals work. And that isn't available to the degree that it was in this biennium. And therefore the impact of that valuation is really important to engage in. So I think that I don't think that we have an ability to directly answer a lot of those questions now, but that is, I think, absolutely the intent the next question, the next meeting that the homeownership team has on this, to be able to, one, hear what we're hearing today through the chat, look at what we're currently doing, and just genuinely have kind of more collaborative conversations around how we make sure the state's interests are upheld, and where there are places that developers, that owners, that lenders need to be able to see, and if there are areas that we could find common ground. So I know that's not a direct answer, but it's an acknowledgement of a huge need, and certainly a big part of future conversations.
Right, and I do see also a question, about this recording. I think on the presentation materials, we will be sure to post that on the web and we can circulate it. And we'll also, again, pull all of the questions that are submitted today here into the questions and Q&A, as well as through the follow-up survey on Lyft homeownership. We'll put all of those information together to share and affirm that. And then I think I see the question from Sarah on that, is DOJ agreeing to settle on a standard set of closing documents that rather than negotiating each project from scratch? Absolutely. I think we are all aiming for template documents so that there is a standard that we can all be clear and transparent about. And I think part of this effort has really been to do and be able to get exactly into that space. On the rental side, I think there are Lyft homeownership drafts out. We've shared those in the past several months around Lyft rental, and are really solid enough to be able to convert those into templates where there will be clear, crisp expectations, strategies. And on the rental side, at least, there was had previously been a disconnect where there were tax credits in it. It had a little bit of a different aspect of it than when there were not tax credits in it. And honestly, the state had more controls where there were not tax credits. We are aligning both of those. So there will be the same expectations, the same needs for all of those. And I do believe that the homeownership team is also working to get to a place of clear and consistent templates.
Yes, Natasha, we would second that as well. But we also have to look at something that we discussed about the creative process of funding. So with that, we normally have to go through the assessment of constitutionality and also the other requirements. So yes, we're looking to standardize our templates, but we also still have to go through that process as well to make sure everything is okay.
Right. So I think, I'm just really so thankful to see all of the great questions that are coming in. I think it will give some really concrete pieces to be able to put thoughts and response back to both inform future conversations on Lyft homeownership and then just broad engagement otherwise. And realizing that we are approaching time, and thinking that I will start to wrap up here. Generally, I think one of the pieces of feedback which will absolutely need to be part of our future follow-up is, I think, on this, the concept of the Lyft security and in particular on the homeownership side. And I think part of the changing dynamics that Keeble and Caleb have really dug into on the homeownership side is also likely tied to the market shifts and the market challenges, the increased costs of development that are both meaning that land value is increasing and that we are able to then increase the amount of Lyft investments into those projects, but also that the cost of building is bigger than it used to be. And that is creating new challenges around leveraging construction debt into these projects. And I think, and I think that is clearly a challenge. And so I don't think that we are saying it's not a challenge, but I do think that securing the resources against the land has always been the core tenet of our LIFT investments broadly, as well as in LIFT homeownership. And so these are not new strategies, but they are new pressures on the program that are creating different challenges than we might have had previously. Shannon, I see your hand.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, you haven't seen them on LIFT for home ownership because it's been a consistent struggle from the start of the program that in rural communities where we're building, there just are no comps. There maybe have been no comps for 3 or 5 decades. And so the appraisals, it's a new thing because no new homes have been constructed on land. And literally the day we get the home built, we get a more realistic comp. But when it's sitting there as bare land with no comps, we will get appraised like Tillamook in the historic area close to grocery stores. We got an appraised per lot value of $16,000. You never saw that application, right? Because it was such a barrier. That amount of lift couldn't be meaningful to the project for the hurdle of completing even the application. So that's not a new problem. They're problems you haven't seen because they couldn't even get to your door.
Absolutely. And I think those are the details of the challenges that we need to respond to in policies around appraisal processes. And that policy is not specific to LIFT. I think it is a policy around valuation in rural communities where there are no comps to rely on. And so I think it is really important to understand, to be able to distill what the challenges are and think about that holistically as how do we establish responsive policies, bring our programs, make sure that we are sufficiently stewarding this constitutional resource so we don't put the entire resource at risk, but that is real. Like I think that, that is huge. That is an issue that needs to be identified and to have strategies figured out. And we need to create policies that will do as much as we can to support that. And because, if we are going to do homeownership development in rural communities, how do we make sure that we're able to really value that right and appropriately? And again, I think it's really digging in on these issues. What is specific a Q-bond challenge? What is a valuation challenge? And kind of approaching it that way. And I think that will be incredibly fruitful in order to be able to go into that collaborative space of understanding. I think, we are all in this virtual room subject matter experts in our own perspective. And so bringing all of our different perspectives together to have a real conversation around it is exactly what we need. So I just really, again, I just appreciate being able to highlight and hear the challenges and the real impact of our policies, and so we can kind of think about those in different ways and push into the details versus into the umbrella. And so I think, anyway, very exciting to be able to get into that conversation. And I think, again, it's like whether that, I think, again, the appraisal would have been a deterrent in the past, and now we're trying to do more of that work. Again, really exciting opportunities to be able to do more work with the legislative investments and balancing that with the really growth challenges of really doing that work. Great. So I realize we're not over time, so I will maybe, Caleb, if you want to if you have any words of wisdom as we wrap up here today.
No, nothing. No sage words of wisdom other than I think that last example, and Natasha speak to that. I think that is, particularly in homeownership, where we need to get to in the conversations, right? Is how do we get to that level of detail and understand what is what are the parameters around the decision? What is it needs to be done? What are our shared outcomes? And where can we push and where can we not? So much more to come. Appreciate the engagement across the board, and looking forward to the follow-up conversations.
Great. Thank you all. Happy Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug.